Hello, everyone, and welcome to SQL Beats. My name is Michal, and I'm a program manager on the Azure Security Center team.
My name is Michal, and I'm a product manager at the Azure Security Center team.
Thank you for joining us today and to our session about protecting hybrid data workloads with Azure Defender. During this session, we will talk about data security challenges a little bit. We'll also introduce you to the very new and exciting Azure Defender. We'll talk about Azure Defender for SQL, which is what you're here for. And then we'll wrap everything up with a cool demo that ties everything together and show you how to protect against, your SQL workloads against threats. Let me start with the bad, but also very much obvious news. No organization is immune to data breaches and security incidents. Once a year, Verizon publishes a report that analyzes security incidents and data breaches that were reported by organizations during the previous year. Here are some interesting facts from this report to keep in mind throughout this session. On-premises assets are about 70% of reported breaches. 77% of cloud breaches involve breached credentials. And 30% of the attacks involved internal actors. Now, you don't need a Verizon data scientist to tell you how important it is to protect your organization and your sensitive data in your organization by defending all potential attack surfaces. Now, in today's day and age, workloads become heterogeneous and hybrid. There is a wide variety of resource types and environments in every organization that are used to process and store data, like IaaS, PaaS, multiple clouds, on-prem, etc. Attackers and malicious users are able to take advantage of the complex environment to threaten the organization's data assets. There are numerous attack vectors that threaten organizational data, including SQL, of course. And it is critical for organizations to effectively safeguard the attack surfaces and not only the data itself. Azure Security Center offers a comprehensive layer of protection, helping you to defend your environment entirely, and a centralized view on the security state of all your assets, not only data assets. With that, I am very pleased to let you know that Microsoft now offers a unique approach for security professionals, providing them a way to use extended detection and response tools integrated into a SIEM application, and giving them a centralized view to all protected resources. I'm honored to introduce you to Azure Defender. Now, naturally, for this conference and this session, we'd like to focus on protecting SQL data. But a good starting point in this journey is Azure Security Center, which is a dashboard that helps security professionals strengthen cloud security posture, track compliance state, and manage workload protection. Azure Defender in Azure Security Center provides threat protection for workloads running in Azure, outside of Azure, and in other clouds. It enables continuous assessment of security posture, protects against cyber attacks using Microsoft's vast threat intelligence and streamlines security management with integrated controls. Enabling Azure Defender across your subscriptions allows you to manage security across all your server workloads running on-premise, in Azure, and other cloud platforms, all in one place. With Azure Defender support for Azure Arc, you can gain instant insights on security issues in a hybrid workload. Now, again, I know you're all here for the SQL story, but in order to understand how to best protect it and to leverage the strength of Azure Defender for SQL, please bear with me as I give you a quick overview of the bigger picture of Azure security. SQL is a single component in a very complex environment with multiple solutions that are often not integrated. What customers tell us is that they need an intelligent, automated, integrated security solution to close these gaps and provide visibility and proactive response across organization. Microsoft Defender is a unique family of offerings that provide detection and response tools to protect organizations, Microsoft 365 assets, including users, devices, and applications, and infrastructure data from Microsoft Azure and hybrid environments like virtual machines, storage, SQL databases. Microsoft Defender gives you the best of both worlds, end-to-end visibility across all of your resources, and intelligent alerts built with a deep understanding of individual resources and filtered with AI. It is also integrated with Azure Sentinel, Microsoft SIEM, which means that defenders can now focus on what's important, namely mitigating threats. Armed with more context than ever, security professionals can spend less time on infrastructure or addressing a large volume of low-fidelity signals and focus on what really matters. So to recap, Microsoft Defender combines knowledge of Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Azure workloads and applies artificial intelligence and automation at a resource level to highlight the most important alerts and surface them in Azure Sentinel. I think it's time for a quick demo to show you everything that I just mentioned. So Azure Security Center and Azure Defender.
Thank you, Michal. We'll start our demonstration with showing how actually easy it is to turn on Azure Defender on your entire environment, including our beloved SQL servers. You might think that adding a security solution upon your SQL server might require lots of configuration, settings, changes, maybe even changes to the application. That's not the case with Azure Defender. Azure Defender for SQL and Azure Defender generally is just one-click turn-on experience. You're going to your Azure Security Center, pricing and settings, and then you find the subscription you want. I chose our demo subscription. You go to Azure Defender plans, and all you need to do is one click on the Azure Defender on, and second click on save. I, of course, already have it turned on, and I recommend you to do as well. What we can see here, we see here all the resources that Azure Defender will be protecting, including, as we said, Azure SQL database servers and SQL servers on machines. Those machines can be anywhere, on your data center, in any other cloud. If you have some lonely island connected to Azure, you can put your SQL server there as well, and it will be protected. It's also important to say that once you enabled Azure Defender, Azure Security Center management capabilities will help you to auto-discover any SQL server that's connected to your Azure environment, and it will be protected in the future as well. So now going on, you're covered. Let's see what we got from this turning on. I'll go back to the Azure Security Center overview dashboard, which Michal just demonstrated in the slides. We have here 4 pillars. We're going to see how SQL Server is relevant and have a small perspective in each of them. Secure Score tells you the situation and the health of your entire environment. It, of course, takes into consideration recommendations that are relevant to SQL servers, but also it tells you the entire situation of the environment your SQL server exists in. Compliance. Compliance is a known issue for every person that deals with sensitive data, and because we're here in SQL Bits, I guess you all have some memory of working with compliance. We all know it's really hard, although it's really important, and Azure Security Center helps you to stand in compliance. Azure Defender, which we're going to dive into just small time in the future, helps us to find threats and attacks that are currently ongoing. And inventory helps us to look at our entire resource estate, including our SQL estate, from the perspective of each resource and its health situation. Let's look at the Azure Defender. Azure Defender gives us alerts about everything that's happening in our environment. Of course, we can see our SQL Server on virtual machines, Azure SQL servers, and as we said, any SQL server you have somewhere connected to Azure, you will be able to see it here. But what with the other resources? What they do to have with our event here in SQL Bits. So each of those resources also have some connection to SQL Server. And we can see that protecting it is also protecting SQL Server. Virtual machines are lots of times the infrastructure for our SQL Server. And if they are vulnerable, our SQL Server is vulnerable as well. App services are lots of times the interface for our SQL Server, and the surface for very popular attacks like the famous SQL injection attack. Key Vault is a popular solution for storing our credentials for our SQL Server. So if someone breached the Key Vault, he can later come and just come in through the front door to my SQL Server without me even noticing. And storage accounts are a popular solution to back up data from my SQL Server. So even if I secured my SQL Server as much as I can, the data might be unprotected if it's backed up to a storage that's been under attack. We can see here that we have a protection on a hybrid environment, heterogeneous environment, on a different vector attacks, and all in one click. Also, we receive some advanced protection options, and we'll touch in the future in the SQL vulnerability assessment option. Going back to the Azure Security Center, we can also see the inventory. Before, in Azure Defender, we saw in one centric place all the alerts. Here, we can see all our SQL estate. We'll go to resource type and look for SQL. Again, we can see here SQL databases, SQL managed instance, SQL servers that can be anywhere, and SQL on virtual machines that are on Azure. Clicking on them, I can see all my SQL state, the recommendation on it, and in the future, the number of alerts on it, and just browse. We see how in one easy click, we received protection on all of our SQL state with future auto-discoverability, and even resources and the entire environment of our SQL, which is, as we see, really relevant to our SQL protection. Back to you, Michal.
Thank you, Miki. Now let's get to the SQL business. In the next part of this session, we'll discuss how Azure Defender can protect your SQL assets wherever they are. So some of you may already be using advanced data security features to protect your SQL PaaS and IaaS machines. Azure Defender for SQL is a rebrand of these capabilities, which include the functionality of surfacing and mitigating potential vulnerabilities, and of detecting and investigating suspicious activities that could indicate threats to SQL servers. So this offering is basically an extension of what was previously called advanced data security that is already available and widely adopted by customers who are using Azure SQL databases, managed instances, Azure Synapse Analytics, and SQL servers on Azure VMs. The big news here is that we now protect your SQL assets anywhere, wherever they may be. The different flavors of SQL in Azure, as before, SQL on other clouds, and SQL on-prem. By enabling Azure Defender for SQL, you can enjoy Azure Security Center's multi-layered protection, SQL, OS, and service layers across hybrid SQL estates, even if your SQL servers are running outside of Azure. This goodness is achieved by using Azure Arc. Azure Arc-enabled servers allows you to manage your machines hosted outside of Azure on your corporate network or other cloud providers, similar to how you manage native Azure virtual machines. When a hybrid machine is connected to Azure, it becomes a connected machine and is treated as a resource in Azure. In our case, Azure Arc-enabled servers, SQL servers, provides DBAs and workload owners the ability to register and track their SQL Server instances across on-premise, edge sites, and clouds outside Azure. Azure Security Center's native integration with Azure Sentinel allows collection of data at scale across all users, devices, applications, and infrastructure, both on-premise and in multiple clouds. In turn, Azure Sentinel provides security ops teams the ability to investigate and respond to security incidents on SQL servers at scale with built-in orchestration and automation of common tasks. In addition to extending Azure Defender for SQL support to all SQL assets wherever they are, we have also simplified the experience to enable Azure Defender by providing a central operational dashboard in Azure Security Center, where you can easily tell at a glance which resources are protected and which aren't, and can easily turn on Azure Defender for the resources that are not yet protected. We have touched on this in the demo, but I'd like to remind you that with just a single click, you can enable Azure Defender to provide your organization with multi-layered protection across hybrid SQL estates. Once you enable Azure Defender for SQL, it is automatically applied to all existing SQL machines, and when new servers are added to your environment, they will be protected as well, without additional configuration on your end. Now let's move to the next section of this session and take a closer look into Azure Defender for SQL capabilities and some considerations when enabling it for your organization. So what's included with Azure Defender for SQL? The first is advanced threat protection, a detection service that provides DBAs, workload owners, and SecOps the ability to detect threats such as SQL injection, brute force, and privilege abuse in SQL servers in and outside of Azure. It continuously monitors and detects unusual and harmful attempts to access or breach SQL servers. The service generates actionable security alerts in Azure Security Center that provide details of the suspicious activity and guidance on how to mitigate the threats. The second component is vulnerability assessment, which is a scanning service that provides DBAs, workload owners, and security officers visibility into their SQL server's security posture and recommendations on how to improve it. The service continuously scans SQL servers and flags potential security vulnerabilities, such as misconfigurations, excessive permissions, and unprotected sensitive data. The scan results include an overview of each SQL server's security state and details about each security finding, including a remediation script where applicable. Again, with Azure Security Center, you can see both alerts and misconfigurations for prevention and mitigation in one place for all of your protected SQL resources. Let's take a closer look into vulnerability assessment, which is an area that is very near and dear to me, and learn about how it can help you improve your security posture, prevent the next attack on your SQL server, and produce a compliance report for auditors. So I'll start this demo in Azure Security Center. This is the recommendations page where you can see the secure score of your subscription or multiple subscriptions. And a secure score is basically an indication of the security posture of the resources that are registered or part of this subscription. This section is recommendations. They're all grouped by controls, where each control represents a security risk that you should mitigate in order to protect your resources and to improve your security score. An interesting thing to do here is to filter by SQL, to search for SQL, and then you can immediately see all the recommendations that are relevant to your SQL resources. I find this really useful. For each recommendation or control group, you'll see the impact that it has on the security score and actually the potential score increase that you can get by remediating the recommendations and the vulnerabilities that are shown here. The part that I want to draw your attention to is the vulnerability assessment part. And this is, there are two here that are interesting, one for SQL databases, so Azure, and then everything else. So remember how we said that Azure Defender for SQL is really protecting all of your machines, regardless of where they are, wherever they are. This is where you're going to see them, all your Arc enabled servers, SQL servers on other clouds, etc., on VMs. It's all going to be here. But I want to focus on actually Azure databases. And when I go in here, what I see is a list of all the resources, so all the servers that are part of my subscriptions. And below, when I scroll down, I can see all the security checks. So VA scans the database and the server, and returns a list of, and actually runs a bunch of, or a group of predefined rules, security checks, that help us identify misconfigurations and other vulnerabilities, security vulnerabilities. And here is a list of them. But I'd like to actually go into one specific server. And then when I go in, I see all the databases that were scanned. You'll see the unhealthy databases and then healthy databases with the severity of the security checks that were run the last scan time. I can see here as well. And then again, the list of, this is just a different angle. So the list of rules or security checks. So for example, if I click on this one, then I'll see all the information for this rule, the description, general information, what would a remediation look like, the impact, the query that we ran in order to, when we tested for this vulnerability, and then the affected resources. So this one applies to this database and not master, for example. If I go in here, then what I'll see here is the list of the last scan results. And last scan results for this database will show me that I have 11 failing checks and then 39 passing checks. And then I can click on any of these to actually see what, to see again, more information about each one of the rules. What was this? What was the check? What is the information that we were looking for? And then let me just pick one. So VA 2108, that's minimal set of principals should be members of fixed high impact database roles. So I get the description of what this rule is. I get the query that ran, and then also the result set. I also get a remediation script, and I can run this remediation script on this server, and then by that, I can fix this potential vulnerability. The other thing that I can do is I can take a look at these principles, the result set of the rule, and decide that they are applicable, that they are acceptable for my organization, that these principles are okay, and I only want to know about deviations from this point on. I only want to know about deviations from this result set. In this case, I will approve as baseline. Once a rule result is approved as baseline, the next time the service runs, only if there is a drift, only if there is a change in the results, is when I will see this as a failure, but otherwise it will consider it as passing. One more thing that I wanted to call out, and I believe it was already mentioned, but you can see a column here of benchmark. So VA, the predefined set of rules that we scan and we run on each database are based on Microsoft's security best practices, but also on external or on security standards and benchmarks. So you can see FedRAMP, SOX, there is CIS, there is all bunch of all sorts of benchmarks that we are checking for. Moving on to talk about some of the considerations and implementation details of Azure Defender for SQL. It is particularly important for us at the security session to look at security in some context. We at Microsoft are aware that security is part of Balance's system that always keeps in mind that security needs to coexist alongside privacy and performance. In the next few slides, we'll talk about some of these considerations and how we balance security with performance and privacy. Consider this environment, for example, where we have Azure SQL databases and Azure SQL on VMs, all on Microsoft's cloud. We also have SQL servers installed on-prem and on two other clouds, Amazon's and Google. Leveraging the capabilities of Azure Arc, we can create a native Azure experience to all the SQL servers outside of Azure. Leveraging Azure Security Center management capabilities. All these SQL servers are auto-discovered, and an agent is installed on them to enable Azure Defender for SQL. As I said in the beginning of this section, performance and privacy are a priority for us, and the architecture we use supports that. Sensitive data, like SQL queries, is processed on the machine to protect privacy. Leveraging Azure Arc platform, SQL servers outside of Azure get a native Azure experience, which allows us to upload non-sensitive data, like logins, to Azure and analyze it using advanced algorithms in the cloud to spare the compute power and not impact performance. Logins information is then used by Azure Defender for SQL to learn the behavior of your SQL servers and detect and alert on anomalies in login patterns. In addition, and this is brand new, Azure Defender for SQL consumes threat intelligence from various resources, Microsoft internal and external, and makes them available for you as part of the Azure Defender for SQL offering at no additional cost. These sophisticated threat intelligence algorithms updates you when malicious actors are trying to approach your SQL server. For example, someone who is trying to connect to or already is connected from a suspicious IP. Many SQL injection detection tools out there use an oversimplified approach and only look for suspicious queries. Our patent SQL injection detection algorithm learns patterns of queries that are specific for your SQL servers and alerts based on them specifically. We started this session by giving you a very high-level overview on security. We discussed how Azure Defender integrated with Azure Security Center provides a centralized view of your organization's assets and data assets, security posture, and state, and helps you manage security across all your server workloads. We then revealed Azure Defender for SQL new capabilities and extended support, and talked about how it is now protecting SQL assets wherever they are, in Azure and outside of Azure. We also drilled down into the more technical details of Azure Defender for SQL. Now it's time to wrap it all up and show you how it all ties together.
In the previous demo, we focused on the capabilities of Azure Defender to protect in one centric place your entire environment, including your entire SQL estate. Now we're going to focus on one specific SQL server. Here I have SQL Server on-premise. It's here in our data centers, SQL Server 2016 Express Edition, and it's connected to Azure through Azure Arc. Actually, to be completely honest, Run Madev is the machine of my boss, which seems to me like the best target for an attack that I'm going to demonstrate for you. The attack is really similar to an attack pattern that was observed just a few months ago and infecting more than 3,000 databases daily. The pattern is entering using brute force to a SQL Server on-premise, and then by using the XP command shell command, inhaking a command shell from the SQL Server and running CryptoMiner. So we're going to enter to the SQL Server with brute force and use the SQL Server compute power to run a CryptoMiner. I'm going here to the Security tab. Again, it's important to emphasize that this SQL Server is sitting here. It's not in Azure originally, but using Azure Arc, there is a really native and natural experience in Azure for this SQL Server, including a Security tab that selects for me all the relevant recommendations and alerts to this specific SQL Server. So we have here two parts. First is recommendations. Recommendations is the proactive approach to harden my SQL Server to try to avoid upcoming attacks. Also, I have security incidents and alerts. Security incidents and alerts are trying to catch ongoing threats and protect me from things that I couldn't protect from a priori. Again, as we emphasized before, it's important to understand the SQL Server is part of entire environment. So here in the recommendations, we have all the recommendations that are relevant. We have recommendations regarding the SQL Server itself, but also regarding its environment, like this suggestion for endpoint protection that refers to the data center that hosting my SQL Server here. We will go and deep dive, as we promised, on the vulnerabilities to your SQL Server. We're clicking on that, and we can see the split of recommendations per every database in our server. And we can see here the famous best security practice, SA login should be disabled. We can click on it and get all the information. The description, why it should be disabled, the remediation, how we disabled it, the impact that might happen, which is specifically important in our scenario. SA login is the default login, which is known to everyone, including attackers, which is a popular try in brute force, and lots of times it's working. We have a query to fix it. We have here the benchmarks, which is also an important feature to see to which benchmarks this recommendation is applying. And we can see here the affected resources. Also, we can see that for this machine, XP command shell should be disabled. XP command shell is allowing to run in a command shell from the SQL Server. And in case that the SQL Server was breached, it gives lots of high privileges to the SQL Server and to the attacker to spread on to use the compute power of the SQL Server. It's important to say that all of those recommendations are Microsoft best practices, and we're using the same here in our company. Now that we saw our recommendation, let's go back to the alerts. We see here an alert that states potential secret brute force attempt. I guess it has something to do with the SA that we saw before. I click on that alert, click on the attack from today, and as expected, we can see that someone tried to breach the machine with the SA client. We can see that it tried 100 logins and failed, and we can see here other entities like the account and the host of the attacker, which will in the future help me to pivot and try to understand the whole attack. Also at the left, again, we can see the entire context of the machine, which is originally, I just remind you, is not an Azure machine, but it's became Azure machine, empowered by Azure Arc, and now we can even see the tags of the machine, understand that the environment of the machine is production, and we'll know how to prioritize it and how to work with it. Assume we want to take action upon this threat, we'll go to take action. In take action, we have suggestions for mitigations, like blocking the IP from which the brute force happened, or disabling the SA. We can see that this is connected to the recommendations. So here we see that if we were applying the vulnerabilities on your SQL Server should be remediated, and blocking the SA, that would never happen. And we can also create an automatic triggers if we want that every time this alert is happening, something will happen in the future. But let's assume that we don't understand yet that this is an attack, or we want to understand how deep and how far this attack went. We'll go to Azure Sentinel, and we'll go to the potential secret brute force attempt incident. Here in Azure Sentinel, which has a great integration with Azure Security Center, we have the investigate feature. We'll go to the investigate feature, and we can see, I'll show you how we create it. We can see all the entities that connected to this SQL brute force, and one of them is the machine. We can see what else happened on the machine. So by clicking related alerts, we see here 2 more alerts. Using the timeline, we can see that the pattern that I just told you about, and actually the pattern that I have done on the machine, is what happened. Someone breached the machine using SQL brute force, and then ran through the XP command shell, CSV host, and executed suspicious process, which is an indication for crypto miner. We can see more details here, or go to this alert. It's important to say that this alert was created by Defender for the Windows, and this was created by Server Defender. So we have here, again, all the layers of the attack, giving us context to the SQL Server, what the attacker wanted, and in what environment we operated. Just to closure it, we took a SQL Server that is originally not in Azure at all, and using the Arc environment and enabling Azure Defender before for our entire environment, we're able to detect an attack, and if we were resolving our recommendations, we wouldn't receive this attack from the beginning. So that's the power of the integrated Azure Defender for SQL. And back to you, Michal, with more details.
Thank you, Miki. That was a cool demo. As you can imagine, it's not the first time that I'm seeing it, but I still find it powerful and exciting because it really does show an end-to-end use case and demonstrates how Azure Defender for SQL with Azure Arc support and integrated with Azure Security Center and Azure Sentinel provides this nice comprehensive protection of SQL servers everywhere. We hope you enjoyed this session and found it useful. Please feel free to reach out to us using the email addresses on the screen with any question, concern, or feedback. We are more than happy to keep in touch. Thanks, everyone.